You know what's weird? I remember this episode pretty distinctly. It felt kind of like a impacting episode, and it kind of was. And certain elements of it were surprisingly well done. And then certain elements of it were surprisingly bad. All in the same episode. It's just kind of weird seeing that in something like this. Now, excuse me. As ever, I like to go in depth into the behind the scenes as much as I can. Unfortunately, don't have a lot for you today. This was Paul Lynch's last outing with us. He's the director who did The Naked Now and 11001110, whatever the hell it is, and a couple other episodes as well. He hasn't actually done that much stuff. I only comment on it because by total coincidence, basically, I have recently looked at episodes that he has directed, both The Naked Now and the Binary one. So, again, by coincidence, I have happened to look at the situation and see his kind of directorial style, and it is present in this episode. It's not bad, but you can kind of tell that the man is better at certain types of directing than others. Let me give you a good example of this. There are scenes where Nana Visitor is portraying grief. Now, she does it really well. She's just sitting there, and she's got this really distant look on her face, and she takes a little while. I'm sorry, I'm doing the pauses on purpose because she takes a little while to respond to people and to acknowledge things, all sorts of stuff like that. And then you every now and again you hear the music swell and the camera shifts focus, and it's like, and I could just hear Lynch in the background. I could just hear him say, "And go grief," and then she just gets the waterworks start, and she just starts going really loudly and really, well, I don't want to call it bad, but not good. And it's just weird seeing that kind of thing from the same actress portraying the same general emotion in the same episode under the same director. It's kind of some weird stuff. Again, similar to several other episodes he's done, as I just mentioned. Now, the writers of this episode did deliberately reference Day of the Dove. I'm sure any of you who are long-term Star Trek fans remember Day of the Dove and look at that episode and that's totally the same thing. In Day of the Dove, it was parentheses, asterisk, parentheses, who was doing it, and here it's this mega nanoprobe plague thing, but same general concept. This one works a little bit better for me, though. Ignoring the fact that it doesn't rely on a being who is basically magic, the entire idea of, okay, you two refuse to be at peace. Drop. Here, we've made sure you can fight each other forever. Have fun. You know what's funny is in a lot of cases like this, one of the first things I'd point out as a world builder is the aspects of the setting that don't actually make sense. Where's the running water, right? Where's the food they're eating? Where's the farmhood? Where do they have resources to make these things? Well, by all accounts, they have what they were dropped with, the clothes on their back and the makeshift weapons they have access to, and that's it. When you die on a daily basis and death from starvation is just kind of another thing, I mean, whatever, right? In other words, what I'm trying to say is I think this place is even more of a hell than they already are portraying it as. Now, that goes contradictory to some other concepts that are saying, and it's probable that the script didn't actually mean it like that, but where are they getting their food, if they do in fact have food? Where are they getting their water, if they do in fact have water? I mean, they're on a moon. Granted, a moon with an atmosphere, but a moon nonetheless. I don't know. Regardless. I'll talk more about the specifics of that later. What I really want to talk about is Opaka. Now, I like her. I wrote her name down. Camila Saviola. I hope I'm saying that right. Probably not. I don't think I've ever seen her in anything else, but I liked her in Emissary, and I liked her here. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, hang on. How often is she in this show? And I looked it up. 4 episodes. Twice more she'll be brought back to basically play a prophet in the future as part of prophecy things. in the episode Collaborator and the episode Ascension, I want to say. And then there's this episode, of course, with the episode where she basically leaves the show. And then there's Emissary. And that's it. That's such a weird thought to think of it. Given that this is a show where Nog becomes a main recurring character, the fact that Kai Opaka, who, from a setting standpoint, is one of the most critically important people for the Bajorans as a people, is going to permanently leave the show in every way that matters, is just kind of, huh. Now, I'll talk more about that in a minute. I just wanted to bring that up because that's just weird. I also want to talk about Jonathan Banks as Golan. Now, Banks is someone I've only seen a few times, but he usually does some good stuff. And I thought he nailed the grizzled, broken down, resigned warrior thing pretty well. He was way more reasonable than most fiction tends to portray people in his position. I mean that sincerely. You know, how many times, even in Star Trek, how many times has it been where the Starfleet crew come across, you know, a desperate, violent situation, and they immediately say, oh, death to those people, death to those people. And it takes all this time and effort to convince them not to. I mean, Voyager even did that, for God's sakes, with Friendship 1 is the name of the episode in Season 7, one of the last Season 7 episodes. You know, so to see him be so relatively, you know, okay, yeah, sure. You're a doctor, yeah, okay, whatever. And yeah, we'll go ahead and protect you. I'll go ahead and offer my protection, whatever, you know. He's surprisingly reasonable for how fiction usually portrays this kind of character. Which is funny, because, again, his performance flip-flops a little bit. Like, he goes from being, yeah, okay, I'll talk about this and all that, to, I would never let any of you live. He goes from, God, you know how horrible and terrible our suffering is, to, we'll finally be able to genocide the other side. I mean, there's no in-between. And while that certainly can be argued to be true, remember, these people are going regularly under circumstances that are so severe and traumatic that these people are probably clinically insane at this point. So it kind of fits in character, but only if you sit back and think about it. Tonally speaking, the whole thing just kind of makes me go, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going for that, you know? So, let's talk about a couple of things here. So, they have these files that Dukat left behind, and it is acknowledged that it is Dukat who left these files behind, in behind-the-scenes stuff. So I have a question for you. Knowing what we know about Dukat as a character, as he becomes, the real Dukat, not the fake one from Waltz and onwards, knowing about Dukat, how much do you think that, because he has these security files, and they're not really that well protected, so possibilities. Is this misinformation in case someone takes the station? We do know they prepared for that eventuality, if you'll recall. Although, actually, I think that episode hasn't happened yet. But the point being, you know, that is a thing. Do we know, or, you know, actually, no, that there has been that thing with the Babel, or not the Babel virus, I can't remember. Anyways, point being, we know that the Cardassians have prepared for the inevitability of, you know, being killed prior to now. So that's a possibility. It's also possible that the Cardassian intelligence community, and I don't mean the Obsidian Order, I mean just the intelligence community, is just that stupid, just that incompetent. But I don't like either of those answers. You know the answer I like? I like the idea that Dukat busies himself in his workday with editing some of his reports, especially the ones he sends back home, to basically make himself look good. And this is important, because there would be two key reasons for doing this. One, so that the people back home, you know, Central Command, know that he's doing a good job. And two, so he can have that sort of satisfaction of feeling like he did a good job. You know, basically patting himself on the back. Because I could totally see Dukat doing that. So they talk about Opaka having never really left the planet, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. And then I sort of realized something, and it's something that the show does emphasize a little bit. Oh, excuse me. And kind of helps to inform a few things. And it's something I love so much that I have tried to replicate this same concept within some of my own fictional works. It's the idea of a race, or a group, or a people, who live in a galactic community. Now, what I mean by that is space travel is normal. Faster than light travel is normal. other alien races who communicate with each other is normal. This is the galactic community, right? We know there's Cardassians, we know there's Klingons, we know there's space travel, we know there's teleporters. All that's normal. But we don't really have a lot of that stuff. There are Bajoran ships, of course, but they're weak and they're pathetic, and there's not that many of them. In other words, Bajor is not a spacefaring power, even though they exist within a galactic community. It's a balance that you don't see that often. Usually a race that's just barely entering their solar system or just has a few ships isn't really properly aware of the overall community. Or, if they're aware of the community, they're a part of it in a regular, everyday kind of a way. Now, obviously, there are Bajorans in Starfleet, and there are Bajorans who go out. But, Bajor as a power, Bajor as a political entity and a cultural identity, is basically landlocked. It has been argued, and I actually brought this up before, it's been argued how much is actually considered Bajoran territory. It can be debated, and there are episodes that are going to go into this into the future, and it already has been brought up at least twice, that Bajor's territory might not even extend out to the totality of their own system. So it's just kind of a cool concept, and it kind of helps to inform the world building that is continuing to go on with Bajor and will continue to go on with Bajor, as well as to kind of help to emphasize why, despite everything, despite their misgivings, they're kind of utterly reliant on the Federation as of this point in time. But I digress. So they go through the wormhole, and they do all stuff. I want to give special praise again to the actress. She does a really good job. She does this unstated thing very often, and she does it with really good facial, she's pretty good at communicating without saying anything. And she does that several times, and it comes across very well. I admit, I gave a big grin when she's looking out the wormhole, and someone points out, "Oh, it's funny you picked that. That happens to be the wormhole that happens to be the window that'll be facing the wormhole." And then Sisko says, "Unfortunately, no ships are scheduled for today." And she looks up at him. "Ah, it's so unfortunate." And it takes a second, but then he's like, "Okay, come on, let's go." It takes her through the whirlpool. I just really like that. Obviously, this is whole part of her prophecy thing, fulfilling her destiny, blah, blah, blah. But even if it wasn't, I like that. It's the same thing I'd do. I mean, to be blunt, because I could totally understand that mindset from her perspective. I'm landlocked. I've never left this planet. Not that you know about. And so, if I was given that first chance to go, to space, to go through a wormhole, to go... through a black hole or into another dimension or whatever, my first thought would be, oh, we can't because there's nobody going today? Okay. I could totally get that, so I'd love to give that moment. And she perfectly encapsulates it. Probably the first, and arguably the only time she loses her cool in the entire episode is right after they finish going through the wormhole. And she's just like, that was awesome! And I love just that natural, infectious enthusiasm she has. It helps us, the viewers, too, in addition to just enjoying it, because the wormhole is kind of normal to us. I mean, we've only seen it a few times, but it is kind of normal. Spaceships are pretty damn normal to us. This is Star Trek, Star Trek started on a spaceship, all the way back in the cage, we're kind of used to that. So seeing someone who manages to do a good presentation and acting of what it would be like to experience that for the first time kind of helps to recreate just a little spark of that magic, to remind us of how awesome it would be if we were actually able to go up there and be like, yeah, just little bits like that help. So, there's a lot of tidbits here and there about her clearly being up to something. Pretty much the moment that she gives the bauble to O'Brien, I'd say that's the real definitive moment. Earlier, of course, Bashir, is like, I think she's up to something, or I think she's got something on her mind. Just in case any audience members aren't paying attention, treating us like we're idiots. But there's a lot of more subtle things where she clearly demonstrates she's up to something. This is something that she was expecting. This is something that she walked into. Now that's important to establish because it helps to inform the scene when they're crashing. As they're crashing, the camera occasionally cuts to her. It only does it like twice, I think, maybe 3 times. It's a good crash scene overall. Star Trek and crash scenes are, again, kind of old hat. But the cuts to her kind of help because she looks a particular brand of terrifying. Not in the normal way. I mean, obviously, again, you, real life person, whoever you are, if you were suddenly put in a ship, you'd probably be like, yeah, yeah, but now you're crashing. Now you're crashing on an unknown moon. That would probably be pretty damn terrifying. But that's not what I mean. Because remember, Opaka's up to something. She walked into this. It is one thing to face a doom, or a terror, or a tragedy, or a disaster, without knowing it's coming. It is a completely separate and wholly worse feeling to know it's coming and to walk willingly into it. And credit where credit is due. The actress, Saviola, she shows that. She's just... It's like she's bracing herself. She knows this is coming. She knew this was coming, and she is... Oh, God, I don't want to do this. Oh, God, I don't want to do this. And you just see that in her face. Very well done. Made me feel for her in the moment there. Awesome stuff. I also want to say that her death is interesting given how it's presented, her first death. I say first, we'll get to that. Because the episode, the tone and the structure of the episode is actually wonderfully well presented when you think about it. It's kind of like what Skin of Evil could have gone for if they'd planned for it, and we'll talk about Skin of Evil when we get there. But the one and only defense that's ever been leveled for Skin of Evil is, space is dangerous, sometimes people die. Not every death has to be significant. But if you're going to do something like that, this episode does a much better job of setting that up. You've got her showing up, you've got her her I want to see the wormhole, then you've got her enthusiasm, and then you've got, and she keeps pushing. She's like, maybe we should check this out, maybe we should check this out. And it's kind of building. You see it coming. You, the audience member, sees this coming. They telegraph it. Not super obvious, but it's just kind of building up. And then there's that face I just mentioned in the crash. She's like, ugh. We might not notice that the first time around. I definitely noticed it this time. But, ugh. Then they crash, then they die, and then the senselessness of it really is complete at that moment. Because it didn't just happen and, we're supposed to accept it senseless. That's how real life works. This isn't real life. This is fiction. You're still supposed to tell a good story in fiction. You're still supposed to do things like build up and pay off. And so they build up throughout the entire episode up to her death. It's all one continuous upscale in events until finally she dies. And then Kira overacts for a second. And then you see the guys with the weapons. And just the tonal shift. It feels like a plunge in tone right there. Very good, proper pacing in the construction of that. Wonderfully done. You might think it's weird I'm praising this episode so much. If it makes you feel any better, again, about half the episode is terrible. Because every now and again there's just something that just doesn't fit with the rest of us. I really wonder if this is one of those I want to do this thing. Well, I want to do this thing. Writers butting heads in the room kind of a situation. Because it's really strange. Anyways. So, I want to bring something up here. Really quick. They mention how the Bajorans are up in arms about this. Okay. Why aren't they helping? Oh, right! I already acknowledged that. Because the Bajorans are not a spacefaring power. I mean, they have ships. They even mention that they might send a ship to the Gamma Quadrant to keep in contact. They never say if they actually do or not. But it's going to be on the Federation to deal with this. And, of course, DS9 is out in the boonies, so getting a proper ship out here is going to take some time. I sometimes wonder if they should have tossed a line in there, like, the USS Blackness Block I don't know. Where's my drink? The USS 100% natural seltzer, calorie free, is on its way. It'll be here in like a week and a half, something like that. Instead of just we're sending a runabout and 2 people. I know we're supposed to be underfunded, but really? Anyways, don't worry. They do actually address that in the show later on. It's just early DS9 had a bit of a problem with we need to portray them as underfunded, basically, as much as that could exist for the Federation. But I think they went a little bit too far. Remember, this is supposed to be a very important outpost for a political reason, a scientific reason, and an exploration reason, all kind of wrapped up into one there. So you'd think they'd have, like, I don't know, at least one actual starship stationed here every now and again. Anyways, moving on. So, where am I? Where am I gonna? Oh, right. But I want to talk about the Bajoran thing, because this is actually the beginning of Kai Wynn's plot arc right here, and I know that's. I'm not going to spoil it. I just established the spoiler territories. All I'm going to say is that I want you to picture the Bajoran situation. They have said twice now, in Emissary and here in this episode, that Opaka was the central element, that she was the reason that the provisional government was able to exist, that she was one of the key figures in pulling them out of the occupation, of enduring the last several years of it, of being able to reach out to the Federation, as Opaka personally did. Opaka is probably personally responsible for Bajor's acceptance of the Federation more than any other singular element, because we know need wasn't involved. Too many Bajorans have that whole pride and that natural mistrust, and I'm not blaming them for that. It's totally understandable why they feel that way. But the point is, they'd be willing to look past need, past necessity, past we need someone else in order to just say, get the hell off our lawn. This is our, Bajor for Bajorans. And Opaka kind of helped push back against that. And now she's gone. Now we have the worst kind of power vacuum, because Opaka wasn't a dictator, which is already a bad power vacuum. She wasn't a king or a queen or an emperor, which is already a bad power vacuum. She was the worst kind of power vacuum, the kind of person that had tremendous influence without direct political power, the kind of person that she could talk to a king and the king would listen. She could give orders to a queen, and the queen would listen. Now, I know they don't actually have that equivalent, but you get what I mean by that. This is someone who, if she said something, Bajor would jump. She was a religious, political, and I guess I want to use the word cultural icon of Bajor, and she's gone. Now what? And I don't want to spoil, but thank God this is DS9. They will actually go into now what, because that whole continuity matters thing is one of the main precepts that makes DS9 awesome, in my opinion. They will actually touch on this point in the future. So they crash. Opaka dies. I want to give special praise to Sisko. Again, we've seen this kind of episode, hell, in Star Trek, as I mentioned earlier, but in other works of fiction as well. And what tends to happen, fairly often, actually, especially in Star Trek, is, you are beneath us, Starfleet is better than you, I am superior, Ubermensch, the sort of smug self-superiority thing. And, we would never go down to your level. We would never fight this war. We're beyond you, etc., etc. What Sisko does is he, within minutes of crashing here and interacting with these people, negotiates an actual cooperative trade with these people. Medical knowledge and expertise in exchange for protection and resources. Just boom. I almost can't picture like Kirk or Picard doing something like that. Maybe Kirk. Maybe. But it's just, early Picard, definitely not. Later Picard, a lot more debatable. I definitely couldn't picture Janeway doing this. And I really couldn't picture Archer doing this. It just kind of shows one of Sisko's greatest strengths. And I've actually already talked about this. Sisko is really good at being on the front lines and being adaptable. Something changes, he is really good at that sort of, for lack of a better term, improv leadership. And I think that's awesome, and the way they show that in this episode. It also is relevant because he flat out states we're planning long term. Bashir says we're only going to be here for like a few hours or whatever, and he's like, no, we don't know how long that rescue ship's coming. So we need to be preparing for however long it takes. Automatically assume it will be the worst possible situation and prepare accordingly. Now it's funny because Sisko doing that is right in line with kind of what O'Brien does in this episode. It's interesting because the Federation actually comes across pretty well presented in this episode. We've got O'Brien, who basically manages to invent something, the whole improvisational engineer, making it up, making it work with whatever I got kind of a thing. We've got Sisko, who is the improvisational leader, trying to figure out how the hell I'm going to make the situation work going forward. And we've got Bashir, who, despite a couple of brief moments where he suddenly reverts back into newbie green mode, is actually a very competent and brilliant doctor. I need to figure this out, and this needs to be done, and blah, blah, blah. And, of course, he's the one who deduces what's going on with the damn nanomachines. Although, I'm not actually sure that fiction started using the word nanomachines at this point in history, because I noticed they never referred to them as such, even though they are. The way they describe them is nanomachines. It's just kind of weird, isn't it? Nanomachines, son! Anyways, point being... I also want to give some praise to Opaka's description of the crash. The crash itself wasn't exactly bad, kind of humdrum. But her description of it, I kind of almost wish they hadn't shown the crash. I know, we got to have the first act action sequence. I understand how that's scripted. I understand why that's a part of television. I don't agree with it. But her description of it is so much more powerful than anything they showed on screen. I was watching, and it was getting harder and harder, and there was this blackness, and I felt the heat rushing through me. Just really good stuff. And she really accurately gets across this feeling in her words, or in her tone, excuse me, of something horrible happened to me, and I don't even understand it. It's a nice touch. I really have to give praise to her actress. I wonder what would have happened if it actually taken an hour to get to the wormhole instead of a minute. Anyways, inside joke. Some of you will get it. So they talk about this eternal war. I have a note here that just says eternal war as punishment. Anybody out there a Mega Man fan? I know that's kind of a segue. There's a series called Mega Man XZ, which varies in quality, but the story is interesting to me. And it's all basically precipitated by an individual who did some really, really horrible stuff. He's easily the single most evil character in all of Mega Man, and that's saying something. And this individual was given a punishment by being given like this super mega advanced suit that kept his body alive pretty much no matter what. Forced him to keep surviving, and that was his punishment: eternal existence as punishment for what he did. And I've always found that concept to be a little fascinating, because if you actually have the technology to pull off something like this, I mean, wow, this is really ludicrously advanced in its own way. It's actually kind of scary. I mentioned earlier, it's a little bit better than magic, but this is really only one step down from magic, this level of tech. The ability to, the way that they don't describe it in full detail, but the way it's implied, the idea is that these nanomachines are basically infesting your whole body. And at this point, all of your cellular functions that would normally be accomplished aren't. And these nanomachines are basically forcing your cells to function the way they should instead. So in other words, you're now more machine now than man, twisted and evil, right? That's kind of the idea. Now, they never say this, but one of the things that's implied, and I really wish they had actually confirmed this 100%, is that this isn't an eternal thing. That at a certain point of time, with a certain amount of degradation, with a certain amount of wounds or loss of mass or whatever, you would actually start dying. It would get to the point where they can't keep you going, and there's just too much loss. To use a strange parallel, since we're just talking about other fiction here, in the terrible Wolverine movie, at one point Wolverine is shot through his brain, which removes sections of his brain. Now those sections regrow, but they're lacking the original components, aka his memory, so he loses his memory. Now that doesn't make sense for several reasons, but you kind of get how that could apply here a little bit better, because this isn't just some magic mutant regenerative ability. These are just bots which are trying to emulate cellular function. And, for example, if someone suffered sufficient brain damage, it might be able to make them, I hate to use the word alive, might make them not dead, but I don't think it could truly make them back into the way they were. Which is one of the other reasons it's interesting that they talk about, how we don't fear death anymore, because I could think of at least 3 or 4 ways that you could probably inflict a permanent death into the situation if you really wanted to. Now, the other reason I point that out is because I think that's on purpose. In other words, if they wanted to actually kill the other side, they probably could. I mean, if nothing else, if they managed to win a battle rather than leaving the corpses where they lie, why not bury them in rocks? Why not keep stabbing them? I mean, why not chop their legs off and their arms off? I mean, I hate to sound so macabre, but at a certain point, there are ways to break someone to the point where their regeneration just isn't going to work again. It's one of the reasons why I paralleled Logan over from X-Men, because over the many years Logan has existed as a character, several writers have analyzed how regeneration works and at what point or from what things it's not going to prevent you from. So, in other words, based on the premise, based on the original writing, based on Michael Pillar's thoughts about this episode, I think they're deliberately portraying this as a situation where neither side is actually legitimately thinking about permanently killing the other, right? That the whole point is to hurt them, to kill them, and then to keep going again, because that way we get to kill them again. Now, here's where the episode breaks down, because the episode twice points out that both sides actually want to permanently kill the other side. In fact, one of the climactic moments is Golan basically begging for this tech to shut down their ability to revive, to permanently kill the enemy. We will finally have victory, Again, these people are probably clinically insane, but that seems sufficiently inconsistent, and I really feel like, and I don't mean to be too harsh on this episode, because I did enjoy it, but I really feel like this is one of those concept episodes that wasn't really fleshed out to make it a functional idea. The concept is there and obvious. Eternal war. Boom. Done. The whole point of this is to show how war is a senseless, horrible tragedy, which is a little bit of a, how do I put this? Naive perspective on it, because war is many things, and most of them horrible, but to universally say that war is this, this tragic, horrible thing, well, it just reeks a little bit too much of early TNG, anti-Vietnam kind of a situation. That being said, I get the concept. I get where they're going with it. They want to show, this war and how it turns people into monsters and blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah, I'm with that. Again, Day of the Dove parallel. But why not do a little bit more work to make this a little bit more functional? See, the way it's presented is it's two sides who are fighting on their own planet, right? And then they're brought here, and then they keep fighting. Okay, that kind of makes sense. Well, again, how is this sustainable in a long term? How long has this been sustained? One thing I would do as a writer, I would say this is recent. Let's say 1 year. Now, that probably doesn't sound like a long time, but I want you to really think for a moment everything that has happened to you from 1 year ago till today. Really think about that. All the effects in your life, everything that's changed, new people you've met, people you've lost contact with, new concepts, new ideas. Maybe your living situation has changed. Maybe you're with someone you weren't with before. Maybe you've broken up with something you used to be with. Maybe you've got a new car. Maybe you've moved countries. I know someone personally who's done that. There are lots of things that can happen in a year, especially when fighting and death is happening daily. So I would have it written. They never say how long they've been here, although they imply it's a really long time. I would have it be so that these people have only been here, only, I shouldn't say it that way, have been here a whole year, roughly a year. And they've just been fighting and killing and fighting and killing that whole time. And so obviously, after a year of patterned activity, you're going to get to the point where you just assume it's the norm. Like, that's how sentience tends to work, pattern recognition, right? But then, as Bashir's looking into this, he's like, this isn't long-term sustainable. This isn't something that can keep going. After a certain point, these machines are going to run out of power, or they're going to not be able to repair the damage after a certain point. It would also kind of help to explain why neither side has completely wiped out the other. They could even reference permanent deaths that have happened, and how that's such a rarity for them. Oh my God, someone finally was permanently killed. Holy crap. Just, in other words, do a little more work to make this a little bit more believable of an idea rather than remaining a high concept. So, forgive me. Now, I want to say one other thing here really quick. The one thing the episode does is exactly like every other fiction in Star Trek has done. I kind of mentioned this before. I would never sink to this level. Sisko walks in and basically says, why don't you try truce? Now, I've given a lot of credit to this episode and a lot of praise, but this is hopelessly naive. Okay? Just one person walking into a situation he just found out about today and saying, that enemy you've been fighting for so long that your government kicked you off the planet for? Why don't you just make peace with them? Huh? Do you really think that will work, Sisko? That all they need is someone to walk up and say, hey, do you think about peace? Remember, they portray Golan as someone who's at least willing to think about this. Except when they actually have the meeting, both Golan and the other guy flat out admit, no, I have no intention of letting you leave. I would rather kill all of you than escape myself. Which brings me to my next point. Why did they even have the meeting at that point? Why do they even care? If neither side, including the side with the heroes, I forget which is which, I don't think that's important. If either side was completely unwilling to even entertain the thought, why did they even meet in the first place? Oh my gosh. And you know what? Voyager did it better. I can't believe I'm saying that. It's so rare I get to say that. It's kind of a treat, actually. Hey, Voyager did something better than another show. Voyager has 2 episodes, which I actually like. I've gotten some flack for liking these episodes. But those are the episodes Memorial and the episode Hatred. I remember both of them very clearly, because both of them share a common theme. They present our heroes, our Starfleet personnel, or Maquis, or whatever, as decent people. I mean, all of Star Trek does that, but they portray them as that, and then they immediately thrust them into a unique situation. In Hatred, it's drugs and psychotropic effects and complicated manipulation techniques, and in Memorial, it's literally beaming crap into their brains, right? But both cases go out of their way to showcase how severely this is affecting the main character, how Chakotay just isn't dealing with this right, how Harry is desperate and afraid at these things that he would never do. In other words, both of those episodes showed very clear. Memorial does this better than Hatred, so I'm going to focus on Memorial. Memorial showed very clearly and powerfully just how anti-horrible they were. And I know that sounds like a weird thing, but the point is, they didn't understand. And it showed that. The desperation and fear of being in a firefight, of shooting down civilians because they wouldn't disarm, because you were so terrified, because you were so shell-shocked. The idea of gunning down the enemy because they happened to be there. The kind of mindless killing and brutal hatred that would go through it. These violent, terrible acts that they would never do. That was the whole reason it was screwing them up so badly, right? It was because it was so antithetical to them. That lack of understanding is absent here in this episode. We have a situation arguably worse than the one that was being presented in Memorial or in Hatred. And yet, Sisko just walks in and says, well, why don't you make peace? Now, obviously, Sisko does not understand, and so praise where that is due. But at the same time, it's nowhere near as well presented. It's so vacuous. It's like someone basically saying, "Well, why don't you just do this?" And then just expecting people to go with that, right? I don't know. It really just what? Um, so this is also our first real Kira episode, believe it or not. We'll get several more in the future. It's the bit where she's talking. I'm not like these people. I'm not like these people. She's like, no, you don't understand. And what's funniest is the first thing, and she reiterates this a few times, the thing that she uses as the distinction between them and her is that she has not accepted death. That her whole existence, her whole life since she was a child, has been the struggle to survive. And of course, that's Opaka's point. That all Kira knows, really, is struggling to survive. That she's still trying to wrap her mind around the concept of living, of having a life. It's the kind of thing that's just sort of alien to her. And of course, as Opaka points out, she does feel bad about it. She doesn't say this, but she desperately is like, no, I'm not like them. I had ideals. I had reasons for doing it. I don't want you to think that I'm a bad person just because I was a bad person. She doesn't say it that way, but that is what she's saying. And of course, Opaka, who's pretty awesome, she gets it immediately. And she's like, no, it's okay. It's okay, child. I got you. You have to accept the past to move past it. That is so true. That is so goddamn true. Doesn't matter how horrible. Doesn't matter how traumatic. You got to be able to look at it in order to be able to walk behind it. In order to just move it through. Let that... I like to think of it as ash. Let me use something from my real life. I'm not going to give you examples. If Lord knows I talk too much about it. I like to think of all the crap that happens to us in our lives as ash that just collects on your shoulders. And, the worse the event or the longer it happens, the more ash is there. Until it gets to the point where it just weighs you down. And you just kind of get used to it. You just kind of get used to that ash, that weight, that burden that's just burying you bit by bit as you walk forward. And the only way to really deal with that is to acknowledge and accept that this crap happened, that this is here. You can't brush this ash off your shoulders if you don't first admit that that ash exists. And Kira's been through a lot of crap. So, honestly, I don't actually have much else to say about the episode. There's a bunch of other stuff that happens in the episode after this point, but there's only one real thing I want to talk about after this point. And that's how subtly brilliant Opaka is in the ending. Because, think about this for a moment. The idea of Sisko walking in and making a peace treaty just this once, yeah, that's ridiculous. It's actually kind of comical in how silly and stupid it is. But Opaka's not going to do that. She's going to try and make peace between these people. And she's going to fail. And then she's going to die. But then she'll come back. And then she'll try to make peace between these people. And then she'll die. And then she'll come back. You get it? By unique circumstance, she has been given the tool necessary to endure as long as she has to. The only thing that will keep her from doing this is her own resolve, and I think she's pretty committed. So however much they hate each other, their hatred and their violence has gotten so bad because they don't have to be afraid of death anymore, she will be able to go just as far, if not further, because she also doesn't have to be afraid of death. It's just kind of a cool little thing, the idea of this sort of peace being made under such circumstances. I'm reminded of an earlier TNG episode. I forget the name of it. Forgive me. It's the gentleman who can't speak, who's this great ambassador, who's a partial telepath. He's got the three aspects of his personality. God, I can't remember the name of the episode. I'm sure every comment's going to be telling me the name of the episode. But it reminds me of that because in the end he says, I'm going to have these people learn sign language together as a way to bring them together, which is a nice little thought. But I would put my money on Opaka more because all it's going to take is one guy getting upset once, one little moment, 1 second of temporary insanity, one flash of anger, one blip, and whoops, I accidentally shot the ambassador, and that's the end of that. Opaka doesn't need to be afraid of that. If she gets shot, oh well, she'll get back up in a few minutes. She'll try again. It's kind of a Sisyphus sort of thing, and it's kind of awesome and horrible in its own way. We never touch on this again, spoiler alert. I'm curious how she did. But regardless, next week we're going to be going on to a completely separate issue, so I hope you'll join me for that. See you around, guys.